episode of the Thursday. Everything you wanted to know about dogs, you just didn't have whom to ask. My name is Seizures and I'm going to be your host today. And we're going to go through the very interesting topic of actually how the dog perceive, is that how is it perceive the world around itself, and how those signals that the dog sees and feels got transfers into a dog's behavior as an outcome of that. So everything is very strict way of interaction in between the signals being taken from the environment, and then those signals processed within the brain of the dog, trying to locate a control center that's going to actually define the reaction of the dog on a certain environmental response, as a certain response to an environmental influence. If you didn't watch my last week episode, I encourage you to see it on Facebook or on YouTube, where I was talking about a so-called homeostasis, where actually there is a particular way of how the signals and everything that the dogs receive from the environment got exactly the step-by-step way how that's taken through from receptors. So the receptor sees it, or feel it, or hear it. So we say something to the dog sees something. Something is felt through the senses, even fine senses or the sixth senses, that the dogs has very much awareness of their environment. And the way how do they respond to that environment is nothing to do with the will or the wish of the dog. It's already overtaken. And what happens when the dogs perceive something in the outer world, as one of those things that the dog can perceive is us as well, and our behavior and our mood and our interpretation of the dogs what we want to do, or when we want to condition something in a dog, when we yell at the dog, or we just don't do nothing but we are just pissed off with what was going on with our boss, or with our roommates, or with my spouse and things like that. So how those triggers and how those, with the senses, those triggers were received, and then it becomes nothing of the will of the dog. It becomes already something that becomes a chemical trigger of the neuron that takes into an electrical trigger of the neuron, and then the trigger of that kind goes through the nervous system, looking for the place where it should be processed, looking for the memories to see which kind of the response this signal should be reacting with against, because that is how the body responds to outer world signals. The homeostasis always has its negative response. So that's what usually would do. And I really encourage you to look for another episode that I have last week. Out from that episode, I had a lot of questions about epileptic attacks. So how does the cortisol and does the stress on some level can cause the epileptic attack in dogs? Because what we don't know, and no one don't, that's a science, the question is unanswered. So we don't know what triggered the response of the body, and what actually happens can be found, and I'm going to go through that today to explain a little bit in deep, like what actually happened in the brain of the dog that triggers the so-called active response of the neurocell that doesn't get a chance to rest. So usually, and you're going to see just in a while, when the signal is transmitted to the neurocell, to the neuron, you have so-called resting period until the neuron doesn't get its chance to reestablish itself, is a new possibility of to be triggered. With the epileptic attack, does that piece of neuron, actually that resting time does not exist. So the same neuron get triggered, and what we see is outcome of that is an epileptic attack. So how that, and that's again something that we, no, I just don't like this, but like this. And that's not something that we can, we know, like, okay, this is what triggered my dog, and this is when he eats something, or when he feels something, or when he sees something, then the outcome of that can be an epileptic attack. But also because we are connected with our dogs on much deeper level, like an emotional level as well, the triggers of the dog's response to our emotional state of well-being can be as well the can be as well trigger to the dog response as an epileptic attack. So our well-being can be also a trigger to the dog's response. And then Olga said wonderful thing, like medications are killing a lot of dogs because we are actually trying to manipulate, and this is what can be done with the medications. But in my book that I encourage you to watch and to look after, it's called About the Dogs and Awakening. I was talking about session I had with my clients where we're actually digging a little deeper into the emotional entanglement that happened in between dogs and their owners. And that's what actually, when I say that the response of the dogs towards the environment is always can be emotional entanglement to their human owners, to the humans. And that emotional entanglement leads that the dogs behave like a child by taking over the burden on their little shoulders, and then by being burdened of that, they're actually crashing their little necks and then suffering themselves down the process. So, and I'm going to explain you now how that little thing is actually happening. But in order to understand that, and then that's easy to manipulate by the medications. You will not still be able to understand what is a trigger that caused the thing, but you might be able to, with the medications, to change the outcome of the trigger. But that's what comes to the point is that what happens is that the mind adapts itself, the brain adapts itself to the medications, and then the medications, some epileptic attacks would require one type of the medication, the other one require other type. One dog's going to react on one combination of the medication, the other going to react on other, but all has an idea to lower the response, but doesn't the healing of epileptic attack doesn't go in look for the triggers. It's healing the response to a trigger. So it's actually not sounds breaking up. What that means? Sounds breaking up. You can't hear me, right? On the, if I do maybe like this, maybe it will be better. Is it better like now if I change this? Okay, I hope now it's a little better with the sound on Instagram. And then maybe can you just put in my charger, because it's gonna, I have like 20% of the battery here. So, and then what I found working with these clients of mine, and some of the cases I wrote about in a book, that once the healing come on the level of understanding what the real trigger is, and sometimes it can be hidden in emotional state of the owner, what the dog sense, and doesn't get calmed by the emotional triggers of the owner, being afraid for the survival of the owners, and being afraid for their own survivals, in which way they are kind of triggering themselves. And that's like a higher level of the anxiety attack might be manifesting itself as an epileptic attack. Okay, so okay, the next thing, I'm good again, like a little more higher like this so they can see. So again, I think now the sound might be a little better on the Instagram. So what we need to know first is I'm gonna draw you a little neuron here. So it has its dendrites like this, so it's kind of like, and the other terminal on the other side, they have their branches, but I draw it like this just because it's very important that you know what's going on, like what's happening here inside out, and for that I'm gonna just need this side first, and then I'm gonna change it on the other side as well. So this part here, so this is a front of the neuron, and this is kind of like a body. This is a kind of how you call this? This part of the neuron receives the signals, and then this is axon transfers the signals, and this is the other part of the neuron that release the signals forward to another neuron or to another cell. And it can be, every signal can go to the cell, can go to a cell, to the tissue, usually to the muscles, or it can go to a gland. So something else should be released. When some signal comes into the control center, then the control center receives those signals, transform it through, looks for the reaction should be done because it's looking through the memory. Can I recognize this situation? Can I recognize these chemical reactions? Can I recognize this state of the body and the place of the body from within or into the environment? And what should be reaction, what the reaction should be, starting from here. So everything that we see through the senses gets transmitted and gets received by some receiver. It's a recipient on the body. So we need some receiver that receives that signal. It can be eye, it can be ear, it can be taste, smell, or something else from within the body. So for example, the cortisol is high. Okay, what should we do? Keep the glucose within the blood. So all of that happens within the body or outside the body. But everything tends to have in the same direction. So what does it start first? We have first to understand is that inside of the neuron, it's a negative charge. Outside the neuron is a positive charge. So difference in between the charge from inside to outside makes this cell be reactive. So it can react. Once it's pushed out from the balance, it can react. So it's actually excitatory. How you say that word? Exciting. Put it in excitatory. It's not exciting tissue, it's excitatory tissue. How you say? Okay, Vedran doesn't know, but this cell can be excited with some stimulants. When stimulate, it can be excited. So stimulated, it can be excited. So the neuron cell is excitatory cell, and the muscle cell is also excitatory cell. And that means that there is a different charge inside the cell from outside the cell. And that charge is minus 70 millivolts. So that's when the resting membrane, when the cell rests, is in place, doesn't do nothing. The charge from inside to outside, different charge is minus 70 millivolts. So why the charge is so high? So what happens here, how the charge is made? So we have a lot of potassium ions inside and a lot of sodium ion outside. We do have also potassium outside and sodium inside, but it's a very big difference. So the tendency of the sodium getting in and the potassium getting out is high in order to make that balance. But what will make that charge, what will make that possibility of that cell to be excited to start doing that? Nothing goes out and nothing gets in from the cell if there is not significant stimulus for that, because everything can come in or go out through the gates that require a certain keys to get open. So when those gates get open, then the sodium gets in or the potassium gets out and, in a very certain dynamic and way. So how everything starts is that neurotransmitters are transmitting the excitement of the received stimulus. So when the neurotransmitters are transmitting excitatory signals, it's received. So now the neurotransmitters are coming from the other cell or from the receiver, from the receptor, from the, let's say, eye and everything that we hear, all smell and taste. So the excitatory neurotransmitters are the first step to open the gates, and that's the chemical way, because the neurotransmitter that transmits excitatory signals to the cell to get excited are first chemical reaction, chemical way of opening the first gates on this neuron. So the gate opens, and what gets inside? What gets inside? The sodium gets inside. So sodium gets inside. As more sodium gets inside, because the these gates are open due to the chemical reaction that happens here. So now the next thing what happens, as a lot of sodium brings a positive charge with inside that part of the neuron, now the other cells, the other possibilities of the gates that are starting to open are the electrical key. So these first gates that start opening are the chemical key. They need a chemical key, and the chemical key is bought by the neurotransmitters, in this case carrying a very excitatory signals that will excite this neurocell. So now as a lot of sodium is coming inside a cell, the cells slowly become to charge higher and up and up and up. And there is a next very important threshold of the minus 55 millivolts. So that's a next stage. As more sodium positive charge gets inside a cell, the cell charge gets higher and higher and higher. And now we have another gate, another gate that need a voltage key to open. So first we had a chemical key, and now we are getting a voltage key. That is how the signal is transmitted from from something is seen into actually being seen, because it's going to be processed within the brain at the control center. So we know what the reaction going to be. So if you get to the point of now charging up this little place of the neuron and slowly getting higher to the next level of minus 55 millivolt, then we start opening another type of the cell of the gates that called voltage gate is, because what's the key to those gates is to open minus 55 charge. So as the sodium rushes inside and everything rushes inside, because these gates you have through the entire neurocell. The sodium rushes in, changes the electronic charge of the part of the neuron. As it moves forward, it creates more gates to be open, and all the gates are opening the moment minus 55 millivolt reaches that part of the gate, because in order for this gate to open means that entire neuron here is already charged minus 55 millivolt. Open this one, the new sodium rushes in, brings the positive charge, then minus 55 here, opens this one, the positive charge of the sodium again comes in, and it continues completely until it comes to the terminal, to the final part of the neuron, where actually something else starts to happen. When all of entire this neuron is charged minus 55, something else happens at this point, and then the new gates open here, bringing in calcium that brings in even 2 plus. So no, it's the calcium is not 1 plus, the calcium is 2 plus, brings 2 positive charge ions inside. And what happens now is that entire neurocell gets extremely positive charged. How much? Plus 30 millivolt. So what happens here is the calcium signals to these cells that are carrying neurotransmitters to move forward. The cells get together, they blend with the membrane, and then they release the neurotransmitters into a synapses that connects to, that actually is an empty space between two neurons, and the same reactions follows to the next neuron until it doesn't come. This is where I am now with this, so I'm there. So here is a calcium rushing in, and the calcium not only that fools the charge, pick up the charge of the entire neuron, but also pushes the new cell that actually carries the neurotransmitters out inside the membrane, so it blends itself, and then releases the neurotransmitters that are starting to again connect and open the chemical gate, so the sodium can rush in. So now there is this entire cell is extremely positively charged, and then something else happens. When that happens, so when this entire cell reaches positive 30 in millivolt in charge, something else happened. Now, when the entire neuron is plus 30, then the sodium gates are shut. So no more sodium is coming in. So what's happened now is, what do we have more within the cell and less outside the cell? It's a potassium. So what happens is the negative, or actually positive 30 charge is enough to start opening the potassium channels, the potassium gates. So what happens now? The potassium rushes out and leaves the cell. And the next thing what we need to understand is, now from the plus 30, because now the potassium is also positively charged, and when it goes outside the cell, slowly it's going to decrease the charge of the cell, going down to minus 90 millivolt. And now we have this entire threshold that we need to understand. So we have 70, where it's a resting. So in the 70 negative charge, our neuron and the dog's neuron and all species that have a central nervous system, it's a unique way of the same way of the operation. The charges might different based on the author and based on the species, but this is all the same context and the concept when you understand like how the dog react on what we provide them to do and what we want them to do. You really need to know that once they see something and have developed a control center within the brain, it's nothing of their will. It's only what happens is a chemical and electrical reaction happening within the brain. And then we're going to blend all of this on the end of this episode. I'm going to blend how this all count when you really slowly want to teach your dog to do something, or the dog learning period is actually to do with the changing the possibility of the dog's reaction, because we are changing the dog's physiology and the way the dog reacts chemically and electronically to a certain way of interacting with the environment. So what happens now is, so we had a resting membrane potential, resting, the neuron was resting on the state of minus 70 millivolt. So then it started to charge, so it goes out from the, oh, just a sec, I wanna get this out, just a second, so it doesn't interrupt me. Nope. Okay. Okay, so on the minus 70 degree, minus 70 millivolt, the membrane and the entire cell was polarized. So it was a different polarization within and outside. So that's we call the resting membrane potential. Actually, that's the name of it. But also a resting state of the neuron. When it doesn't react, it's polarized. So we were polarized, and then we were starting to depolarize itself. So we started the process of depolarization. And depolarization was happening until the sodium and later on the calcium were not penetrating deeper within the cell because of the chain of the electrical reaction happening within the cell, opening the gates, sodium to come in. And that created an entire, so it was like depolarization. And then what happens back is repolarization. So we are going back to being polarized. And what was causing this part to do is a potassium going out. So then what happens is a repolarization. So we are repolarizing our cells, so it gets again to be polarized. But what's very important at that point, that's not only that the cell gonna repolarize itself, get back to the state where it was, it's gonna also hyperpolarize itself, coming down to a state of minus 90 millivolts, until slowly something else doesn't happen. I'm gonna explain just a little later, and the state again of the cell gets back to its resting state, minus 70 degree. a minus 70 millivolt. In this part, when the cell is in a place of hyperpolarization, so it's hyperpolarized in between 70 and 90 millivolts, it cannot react. It's a resting state of the brain cell, of the neuron, and in that state the dog's neuron cannot be triggered again. It's called the resting state of the neuron. In the epileptic and in high anxiety, that resting state doesn't happen. You can cause the resting state by implementing a certain medication to make this happen artificially. So what happens next is, how do we go now? So here was from here to here we came by sodium and calcium getting into the cell. Into the hyperpolarization we get by potassium getting out from the cell. And then what happens here when it comes down to minus 90, so the minus 19 is another threshold of the brain cell, or actually neuron, when we open the sodium potassium gates that are functioning in a way that now, because now what happens here is that we have a lot of sodium inside, a lot of potassium outside. So what happens here is that these sodium potassium channels are doing, like, taking out from the cell three atoms of the sodium and bringing it in to atoms of the potassium. In this pumping, 3 out, 2 in, 3 out, 2 in, 3 out, 2 in, slowly the cell comes back to its again the state of being quiet, or actually being resting, in a resting state, which actually requires minus 70 millivolts. So why all of this is very important to understand if you really want to know how you impact your life of the dog. It's because it's not the dog want or doesn't want. It's not a dog's way of understanding the certain circumstances the dog actually lives in. It's a chemical and electrical reaction that happens within the brain. So once the control centers are established for the trigger to be accepted and to be recognized, it's going to be processed through the body and it's going to cause the reaction. What we need to do is reverse the engineering. Try as the animal education experiment of the Dr. Watson created in 1913. That was the year when he was doing his PhD on the Chicago University, and outcome of that was so-called animal education little booklet. I encourage you to read it because it's very important to understand how learning is actually changing the physiology, and why the Pavlov experiment cannot be used, the conditioning cannot be used for learning, because the Pavlov conclusion was it doesn't change the physiology enough so the dog can keep dog, human, anyone cannot continue to perform or to do certain tasks, because it's not enough change in the physiology for that performance to move on as a part of physiology change and like intuitive reaction on the certain outcome. Why all of this is very important? Because, for example, we as humans, we don't have a UV light sensor, so we don't have a receptor that can collect a level of the UV light from the atmosphere. And then oftentimes, because we don't know we are burning, we can be on the sun for long enough to get burned. If we would develop and have something that can tell to our sun, like to ourselves, like, go away from this sun, go away from here, it would tell us, to control center go recognize, say, oh my God, we are burning, and then move away from here so we don't get burned. When are we recognizing the burn of our skin? Long after we are already burned. Why? Because we don't have receptors for the UV lights, for the UV radiation. It's the same with the dogs. If they cannot process a certain trait or certain something that they saw, and the way they perceive right, they perceive the environment, then they cannot respond, neither react to it. And that's where the dogs come to be confused. What do we want from them to do, and why do we want from them to do? And then when you have a understanding of the Watson experiment about animal education, he was continuing the Pavlov experiment, and he said, like, if you want to implement how the conditioning can really work, is by causing the trauma. Is the trauma is strong enough, and you will have all of these people and maybe trainers, right, that would do kind of like a positive enforcement or reinforcement, or negative enforcement, reinforcement, and everyone would be enforcing or reinforcing something, and then they're gonna put an e-collar just a little bit, and then they're gonna choke collar just a little bit, and then they're gonna put this collar just a little bit. It's not just a little bit, it's to cause the trauma that can actually stay in place, and it's not conditioning, it's traumatizing. The trauma is the only way to get the dog be conditioned. And it's not conditioning, it's traumatizing. It's connecting the bad memory within the control center, telling that if you pull a little harder, you're not gonna choke. If you pull a little harder, you're gonna hear this signal, you're gonna hear this voice, you're gonna smell this something, and that's enough to cause the memory. And not a good memory, a bad memory. And then the dogs that are traumatized in that process of learning, every single time they feel a little pain, they feel a little discomfort that might suggest to their little brain that a pain is coming, something bad is coming. It's enough. You know what actually caused them to move away from doing and performing that trait? The cortisol reaction. Oh my God, something bad is gonna happen to me. It's not the endorphin, and it's not the good hormones that are actually kind of slowing down and helping them enjoy. And when you see the dog just lay down and love to be brushed, that's the way when you can actually develop the traits in the dog response, by helping them learn that a certain way of interacting with the humans is actually beneficial from them. Otherwise, you might actually end up, and what is a fear response when we come to the point of understanding how the dogs would react to these changes and the stimulus, is actually trauma. Trauma can be something that's fast and imprinted straight away. We know that from our experience as a child. If the child goes through traumatic experience, and the traumatic experience can be something that happened instantly, in very short time, it might be just a second, but also was felt as a life-threatening. It's going to cause the imprint that will cause every single one to back up from the same actions that might, or not only the action, all the circumstances that might lead to that possibility to be traumatized. Trauma can leave the long-lasting effect in the dog's behavior, but the conditioning can't. Pavlov's conclusion of the conditioning was, it can be used to a certain degree to produce unwilling response of the body. But as soon the stimulus is moved away, the primary stimulus is moved away, the secondary enforced stimulus tend to lower its impact. Why? It's going to disappear. And if you introduce again the primary, it's going to come back, but it's in much smaller amount. And the threshold that is going to, move itself around, going to be lowering and lowering and lowering and lowering and lowering itself. Why? It's because the dog adapts to itself and doesn't get triggered by the same way it was triggered the first time. So how the trauma can replace the conditioning? By being embedded fast and effectively at once, or lasting for a long time, and just enough, just enough, just enough, just enough, just enough, and finally gonna break the dog. Is that something that's causing the positive response of the body? No. Is that something that positive, well-behaved dog? Yes. The dog gonna do what? Gonna freeze in time an emotion produced by those actions. Either stress or stress that was high and intense and momentarily, that so tense that the dog felt it might threaten their life. Or it caused a little bit, 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 lasted enough to be embedded and create a control center response. Which kind of response? A chemical electrical response of the brain, not willingly and choosingly and this and that. For that, dog need to be placed in the environment to have an option. And then by choosing one way, they're gonna, why would they choose to behave properly? Because the humans can create, by knowing these things, the humans can create a nice environment in which dog willingly choose to behave in what we call predictable and positive behavior. Otherwise, everything that we we do from the different point. We want the dog to perform, to sit down, to lay down, to not be triggered by this, not triggered by that. And we use tools. We use arms, harnesses, choke, collars, e-collars, that collars. Why do we need the tools to communicate? Communication means language. Communication, and the most interesting and important language for the dog is the body language. And which kind of body language the human has? A lot of emotional masks, because we don't want to be hurt by the other humans, so we put the mask of this, the mask of that, I'm this, I love that, I pretend this, I pretend that. But the dog sees through those masks. And they know that actually one day those masks will need to fall off. Otherwise we're going to be just switched off by some disease, by whatever is going to switch us off the life. And then the dogs would be like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me if this owner of mine is going to just detach from the world? So-called dying. Who's going to take care about me? And why the dogs are so panically attached to us? Because really, what's going to happen to them if we pay the price for doing all what we do to our lives? And the price comes. And we are seeing the price in our health, in our relationship, in our richness or abundance of the life we have. All of those are the prices for the choices we do. And if we cannot afford the bills to pay, if we are not living in the environment we love to live, if we are not in a relationship with the person we love, if we don't go to the job we care about, which kind of future we can have? The future of the stress we put ourselves is a future of our life that cause illnesses all kind, the breakdowns of all kind, the wars of all kind between mankind and humans. That's the life we live in. That's the world we live in. Just look around. And how the dog reacts when they see, oh my God, these people are killing each other for no reason. These people are fighting with each other for no reason, just because they believe in two different things, out of which neither of them are truth, because everything depends on how we were conditioned. So it's not about me telling you the truth, it's about how did I perceive the world I learned about. I'm not telling this to be true to you and trying to convince you my way or highway. No, it's just about to put to the debate my way of how did I came to this realization. It's when I was 16 years old student at the grooming academy in Budapest. I had a traumatic experience where there was a table of the dog, a wonderful Newfoundland for the show, like a very expensive, very high-end dog was taken to the grooming shop where I was studying. And the dog was on a safety loop. You know, that's a common practice in the grooming shop. And the dog behaved perfectly, nothing wrong with the dog. So he was staying on the table, and because he was a big dog and the table was just enough for the dog, he slipped off. The dog just a little bit slipped off the edge of the table, and he fell. So the dog fell to one entire side, and stays laying like that, with a safety loop around his neck and a broken neck. The dog died instantly because his neck was broken instantly. Why? Because the dog just slipped off the table and pulled off, and his was just that's what I could still, like, I'm now 50 years, it happened when I was 16, I can still hear that neck crack, especially when I'm talking about that story. It's very painful and it's very hard experience, and when I get so emotional talking about this, I kind of like hold myself from not crying. So what did I set to myself at that time? I'll never use a safety loop on a dog's what I will be grooming. 50 years I had a career handling one of the most amazing and most expensive dogs. Out of some had $1 million careers for the lobbying and maintaining their careers over the years, multi-million-dollar show dogs. I never use a safety loop. What I promised to myself, I'm gonna find a way to work with the dogs in a way they're gonna love being on the dog, on the table. They're gonna enjoy the grooming process. And in that way, by developing myself to provide such a high-end level a treatment to my clients, I needed to learn how to change a dog's physiology so the outcome of them being on a table would be joyful experience for them without them wanting to jump off the table or run away or look for where the clients are. Even today, what I teach, and you can see that across, thanks God, I have like hundreds of thousands of students across the globe, none of them uses a safety loop. And that's something that we want to encourage every single one of you. We can force dogs to do anything we want, and it's not hard to do. But what we can do is inspire them to do and perform even better. Because if we inspire dogs to perform and inspire dogs to behave, with every single choice they do in order to please us, they're gonna feel beautiful because the choice came on their own. You know what we are creating in the marriage of the human-dog relationship? It's a very intelligent woman wanting to help her man create a beautiful life for them both. And the woman has a trait that the man can just wish for, that the woman have a much different way of multitasking that we as a man doesn't have. So the woman can organize the life around making a man think he made a decision. That's the way how we can interact with the dog. We can let them think they made a decision by creating the place and by creating an environment in which that decision is made by their choice, not by force. And that's what we call learning, the environment in which the dog learned to behave, not being forced to behave. Because difference in between creating the chemical and electrical reaction in this is something else. When it comes to a stress, the signal gets caught in a control center, and the environment, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and the hypothalamus are looking for the environmental danger. What can kill us in this world? Once the danger is located, the reaction of the dog's body is going to be taken over by the physiology, not by the will. By the will, the dog's actions are taken through the education. And what's the difference in between conditioning and education? It's a number of the myelin shields that exist across the axon. Why? It's because this is the way what increases because the signal now needs to jump over these myelin sheets, because the myelin sheets on its own is actually creating isolation over the polarized. And now, you know, that for the signal to pass those sheets, it needs to jump. The more time it jumps, faster it gets. So as we teach dogs and as the dog learn, not condition, learned by to perform, we increase amount of the myelin shields within their body. So when the Watson was performing animal education, he said, this is the way how you can change the physiology of the animal enough for them to change the behavior. And if you want to condition the dog on the other part, in order for it to work. So either it's going to be a training forever. Why? And you know what? You go to the trainer and you can tell them, okay, can you give me, if I do this with my dog over this time, the way you are telling me, can you sign that that's going to be forever behavior of my dog if I continue, if I take out and I, for example, I don't keep doing this exercising with my dog? The trainer would say, no, you need to keep doing things, otherwise the dog tends to forget. Why? Because the signal is going to be decreasing every single time. If you do not create over and over and over and over and over conditioning of the certain trait, and it's never a learning curve. It's always a conditioning curve that stands to what, Vedrene? Decrease. Tends to decrease and decrease and decrease. But when you learn, it tends to be forever. What's the way to make conditioning last forever? Trauma. Traumatize the dog, it will behave perfectly, like an elephant, like a lion in a circus, and they don't have a tendency to become so aggressive. Why? Because we have them phrased in time when the trauma happened. That's the way how the training, unfortunately, oftentimes works. Collars should be banned by the law. All kind of forcing tools should be banned by the law. And we already reached the level of the consciousness in which we can understand our impact to the world around us as the most conscious being ever lived this planet. And with this consciousness, we still think we need the tools to communicate with other creatures. We should open a place for another world to create behind us, because this is the world we live in, is a price we need to pay for the world we created out from thinking everything can be our way. We need to work our way towards the way, not forcing others to behave the way we want just because we have more power over them or they depend on us, like a children or any other animal, including dogs. If the training would work the way it should, and the relationship we would have with the dogs, you wouldn't have people going to the training programs over and over and over and over, changing a lot of trainers, or don't change the trainers, but then the trauma on its own going to cause some dogs to suffer a different way. So they're going to behave perfectly, but they might end up having a leaky gut, might having chewed the paws, they might have allergies of the ears, and all kind of different physiological collapses as a response to a chronic stress they are exposed while training because of the trauma. And because they are always exploring and always put in a place where they got recognized of the trauma, they live in that pastime of trauma, bringing that experience through the entire life. Following the people and doing all kind of stuff that are telling us that our dogs are anxious. We just won't recognize that because they can sit, they can be quiet in a park, they can lay when we told them, and we have a perfectly behaved dog. No, we have a frozen dog in time that was traumatized when coached. And that's the way how we can long time affect their behavior by putting them on this forever memory of trauma. And that's the way we use tools in order to remember them, that every single time they go out from this comfort zone, it's going to taking over the control center, the way I just explained. It's not a will, it's a chemical and electrical reaction happening within the brain. It's happening with our brain while you're processing me, watching, listening, performing it, trying to find the memory within your brain. It's the same chemical and electrical reaction happens. If you don't have a control center for what I talk you, if you don't feel it right because it doesn't penetrate the mind of yours because you have a different point of views, it might trigger even you feeling angry by listening to this. Why? Because it contradicts your belief. Why? Is because that's what the homeostasis of ours is made. More we do understand the physiology of how do and why do we react the way we do, the more we will be able to understand it's nothing to do with us. Until we do not change our physiology, we won't be able to change our behavior. So, and how to change the physiology is to allow the homeostasis to remain intact and just slowly increase the ability of us to change. Because we are programmed not to change. Our brain is programmed not to change. The brain is the biggest obstacle to change. And if we do not reprogram it the way it's already, we know, because we all of this, and later on next week I'm gonna bring another concept of how all of this and how the dogs are connected to us through the orders of harmony, orders of love. Now we need to understand the fields of the emotions that are actually getting informations out from which amygdala and neural cells and everything else is processed from. Because that's a theory of the Rupert Sheldrake, that everything we do in the pure love and harmony relates on. And that's all of our programs that are created, all of our services and all of our products that we create are to increase the human-dog interaction and relationship, bringing it to a piece of perfect pure love and harmony, as we call our brand. And all of that out from deep respect for the differences in between the species, deeper responsibility that we have in order to appreciate and pull out the best out from those differences that actually lead us to a perfect harmony and love we can feel from there, and harmony on the end. And that's how we can learn to love the fellow man we disagree with. And that's how we can learn, and that the dogs are holding the key for that. Because if we can start seeing the dogs for who they are, and trying to pull out from them the best out from them, because we understand the differences we have, which kind of relationship we would live next to our fellow man that we disagree with? An amazing one. Because no one is right, it's just a perception of how I'm conditioned and how you're conditioned. And the moment you understand the physiology behind that, you stop arguing with the people you disagree with. Because you understand that neither my view is true, because probably if I'm gonna talk to you in 5 months or 6 months, probably I'm gonna add something to this what I learned, and this is gonna be already outdated message that I had, as I had the messages from 10 years ago that I don't align anymore. And that's, thanks God it's like that, so I can see my progress as a human being in understanding the concept of the world we actually live in. With that said, I would leave you here, because all of this explains a little bit that I wanted to touch base here about how the signal for transmitting and actually causing the reaction, the physical reaction of the emotional, of the physiological response that creates an epileptic attack. It can be controlled by the medication, but as the brain adjusts itself, because the important thing is we don't know what the trigger is. We might assume that trigger is this, trigger is that. How would we know the trigger disappeared from the environment in which dog lives? The dog would stop having seizures without medications. And that's a journey. You can find that because you can find it in a food, you can find it in environment, you can find it anywhere, but oftentimes overlooked place to look for why the dog has a seizure is my emotional well-being. Because my emotional well-being is a trigger point for the dog. And if something is wrong with me, of how the way I interact with the dog, because that's the first thing the people with epileptic dogs should look for, is when the dog came into my life. Under which circumstances my emotional well-being, my life, my relationships, my interaction with the other people, with myself, with my parents, my children, my this, my that, my work, my everything. That's where the play starts. That's where the digging starts. And don't be afraid of doing those things, because more you're gonna do things, more conscious you're gonna become, like what might influence the dog response in that scary way. So that I encourage you to read the book I wrote on that topic called About the Dogs and Awakening. You can order it through Amazon. One chapter talks about very emotional case I had with a young guy came to me because his Cocker Spaniel suffered 10 seizures a day. After a single session, the seizures stopped. Having the vets were like kind of sending him whatever. They told him after having a seizure for almost 11 years, that dog was 13 when we met. So, and they said like, we cannot increase or give him any other sort of medication, mixtures, things like that, because any single change in these substances we already gave to this dog is going to make him euthanized. So it's better for you to euthanize the dog. He refused that. He flew from like far away to have a session with me. after one single session of family constellation therapy that I actually later on transformed into constellation of orders of harmony, the way we interact with the dogs, shine a new light about his emotional well-being, led us to the story I disclosed by his authority and authorization in the book, by changing the name and the breed of the dog, by keeping everything under the umbrella without the dog breed or anything else impact that outcome. So you can read the story as is, transcripted almost word to word. And the dog, he called me 3 months later because he just wanted to be sure that the dog was actually good. He stopped using medication because the doctors told him any changes, the dog doesn't react anymore. He has 10 seizures a day. One session was enough for the dog, for the people to stop looking outside themselves for the reason why the dog has a seizure and turn inside. With this constellation that I invite you to learn more by reading a book or schedule a free consultation, you can find on our webpage pureloveandharmony.com, or also schedule a session if you want to immediately jump into a deeper understanding. And then we can do, by using the different tools of family constellation, I transcript it into orders of harmony, because family constellation is a family constellation tools that interact within the family and within the other human beings, relationships and entanglements. What we need here is another set of the tools that interact in between different species that oftentimes get entangled. And in that entanglement, the dogs take over burden of our own emotional burden, and then they try to solve the problem for us by trying to save us for their own sake of saving. The same entanglement parents and children oftentimes get entangled as well. So there is a lot of sources and resources as well. You have on a web page. Also, we created a wonderful communication cards that you can order. It's $24.99. It's a cost in the beautiful design. What, when? If your dog do this, what that actually means. And we report that those cards are actually wonderfully created so you can have an instant answer. It's not a reading cards. It's not something that you kind of, what the dog thinks about me today. It's not that kind of cards. It's just kind of like a set of 4 rituals, feeding ritual, all rituals that actually connect us to understand, for you to understand the meaning of those rituals. So when we exaggerate those rituals, we actually fit the right instinctively already created control centers within their brain that instinctively tell them how to behave without being told to do so. And then without being told to do so, the dogs are actually starting engaging into a learning curve, learning process, self-study, self-education, self-inspiration, with the owners as a head of those inspirations that occasionally actually leave a big imprint in our own lives for the better world we can live in. Thank you so much for your time and wonderful and excitement you always give me when we interact live. Wait for me until next Thursday, again, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or reach me out through the DM or email you have on our webpage, pureloveandharmony.com. And until the next Thursday, I love you all and I wish you nothing but the best in the time to come. My name is Seizures. This was another episode of beautiful episode of the show called Everything You Wanted to Know About Dogs. You just didn't have whom to ask. Everyone on social media, bye, and on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, bye. Until next Thursday, big thank you and all the best.